Picture yourself standing inside a stadium packed with 200,000 souls. Families are laughing, the crowd is roaring, and electricity fills every corner of that space. Then suddenly, the lights die, the exit seal shut, and a poisonous darkness swallows everything for a full decade. When the gates finally swing open, only 1,000 people stagger out breathing. This is no Hollywood nightmare. This is the cold, mathematical truth of the single most catastrophic moment our species has ever faced. We love to argue about which age was the cruelest to live through, throwing around the Black Death or the brutal grip of the Ice Age. Yet every one of those tragedies shrinks into a mere footnote beside the apocalypse that unfolded 74,000 years ago. This was the moment humanity teetered on the absolute edge of annihilation. The moment our survival rate collapsed to a bone-chilling 0.5%. You are about to enter a world where the sun disappeared, forests crumbled into gray powder, and our entire species was reduced to desperate, scattered tribes clawing at the walls of extinction. To truly grasp the enormity of this catastrophe, you need to understand that before it struck, early humans were actually thriving. We had pushed beyond Africa into corners of Asia, tamed fire, and crafted sophisticated tools to bring down the massive creatures roaming the open plains. But beneath what is now the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, a geological titan was stirring from its ancient sleep. This was no ordinary volcano. This was a supervolcano called Mount Toba, resting atop a pressure chamber of molten rock as vast as an entire mountain range. When Toba finally unleashed itself, it did not simply erupt. It ripped the earth open with a fury the modern mind simply cannot process. Picture every nuclear warhead on the planet detonating simultaneously in a single instant, and you are still nowhere near the raw energy Toba released. Nearly 3,000 cubic kilometers of rock and ash were blasted violently into the stratosphere. For context, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens was nothing but a firecracker beside this hydrogen bomb of nature. The explosion produced the most deafening sound this planet had heard in 2 million years, so thunderous that it almost certainly shattered the eardrums of people standing thousands of miles away across India. But the noise was only the opening act of a much deeper horror. Within mere days, a colossal cloud of superheated ash and sulfur dioxide began wrapping itself tightly around the entire globe like a suffocating, impenetrable blanket. Any human living across India or Southeast Asia would have been incinerated on the spot or buried alive beneath 20 feet of cascading gray ash. But the survivors of the initial blast faced something far more terrifying, because now they were walking directly into the volcanic winter. The ash cloud was dense enough to swallow sunlight entirely, transforming bright midday into a dim, eerie twilight that would persist for years without end. Global temperatures nosedived by as much as 15 degrees Celsius almost overnight. Lush tropical rainforests that had fed and sheltered our ancestors rotted away into stinking brown wastelands almost instantly. Imagine waking each morning beneath a sky bruised deep purple, never once feeling the warmth of the sun, while every breath carries the nauseating stench of sulfur and rot. Plants perished first, starved of light and unable to photosynthesize, and the vast herds of antelope and deer our ancestors depended upon vanished right along with them. The food chain collapsed from its very foundation upward, and humanity found itself slowly freezing and starving inside a world that had turned completely hostile. This is precisely where that terrifying 0.5% figure stops being abstract and becomes devastatingly real. Analysis of modern human DNA has uncovered a staggering truth scientists call the genetic bottleneck. The evidence suggests our entire global population cratered from potentially hundreds of thousands down to somewhere between just 3,000 and 10,000 individuals capable of reproducing. Sit with that number for a moment. Every billionaire, every genius, every single person you have ever crossed paths with descends from a group smaller than the population of a modest little town. You would have watched the people you loved disappear one by one, not to any plague or enemy blade, but to the slow, grinding impossibility of finding enough food to keep a heartbeat going. Women too malnourished to carry pregnancies stopped giving birth altogether. The silence blanketing that dead world would have been psychologically unbearable, interrupted only by wind screaming across barren, lifeless terrain. Social order dissolved entirely because hierarchy becomes meaningless when everyone is equally starving. Nothing remained except the rawest, most primal animal instinct to consume and survive. Archaeological discoveries across India tell this story with haunting clarity, where thick layers of Toba ash sit directly on top of human tools, marking the precise moment the world went dark. Beneath that ash the tools are rich, varied, and plentiful. Above it stretches nothing but centuries of absolute silence. Humanity had been reduced to a single trembling candle flame caught inside a hurricane, one breath away from permanent darkness. So how did anyone manage to survive inside this hellish landscape at all? The survivors were almost certainly those clinging to the coastlines of Africa, particularly around places like Pinnacle Point in South Africa. There, the ocean moderated the most extreme cold, and the sea delivered a food source completely independent of sunlight. Shellfish. Picture the daily existence of someone living through this period. You spend every waking hour wading into freezing coastal waters, prying mussels and clams from jagged, cutting rocks. Your hands are raw and bleeding constantly. Your skin cracks apart in the relentless cold, and your stomach never stops cramping from hunger. Each night you press yourself into a cave alongside 20 other people, sharing whatever body heat remains, buried under animal skins while savage storms pound the world outside. There is no hope of a better tomorrow, because nobody knows whether the sun is ever coming back. This continued not for days or weeks but for 6 to 10 brutal years of full volcanic winter, followed by a 1,000-year cooling period that never gave the world a chance to fully breathe again. This was humanity's ultimate filter. The trial that burned away everything fragile and left behind only the most adaptable, most inventive, and most relentlessly stubborn among us. Those who failed to cooperate, refused to innovate, or simply surrendered to despair just lay down quietly in the ash and never rose again. The psychological weight of this event almost certainly carved itself permanently into our collective human memory. Some anthropologists now propose that our deep, instinctive fear of darkness and our compulsive need to hoard food are evolutionary echoes still reverberating from this near extinction. We are the direct descendants of that 0.5%, the impossibly small fraction of survivors who simply refused to be erased when the entire planet turned against them. This bottleneck also explains something remarkable about us. Humans are extraordinarily similar to one another genetically compared to other species like chimpanzees. We are, in the deepest sense, all cousins, every one of us descended from that tiny group of people who crowded together around the last surviving fires of the Paleolithic world. Now place this event alongside history's other catastrophes to understand why Toba exists in a category entirely its own. The Black Death may have consumed half of Europe, yet humanity as a whole was never threatened with total disappearance. Both world wars were horrific beyond description, yet Earth's population still grew across the 20th century. Even the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs was a swift, sudden event compared to the prolonged, agonizing, years-long starvation of the volcanic winter. Being born into the Toba catastrophe meant being born into a coffin, into a world where the future had been erased and the past was buried under ash. A child born in the heart of that darkness would have grown up listening to elders speak of a blazing ball of light in the sky called the sun, and would have dismissed those stories as the delirious mythology of minds broken by age. That child would have lived out their brief, gray existence scavenging for snails and roots, never once feeling warm sunlight touch their face. This was the ultimate lottery of death, where everything depended on precisely where your feet were planted when the volcano detonated. Wrong valley. You died instantly. Wrong continent. You starved slowly. The simple fact that we are here today having this conversation is a statistical miracle of almost incomprehensible proportions. It demands that we examine our modern anxieties with radical perspective. We lose sleep over stock prices, traffic congestion, and the approval of strangers on the internet, while our ancestors spent a decade praying desperately for the sun to simply rise again. The next time the weight of the world feels too heavy to carry, remember those Toba survivors. Remember the men and women who endured 10 years of absolute darkness followed by 1,000 years of cold just so that you could draw a breath today. They carried humanity's torch through the narrowest, most treacherous passage in all of history, shielding that fragile flame with their own shaking, half-frozen bodies. We talk endlessly about survival of the fittest, but this was survival of the luckiest and the most magnificently stubborn. That 0.5% survival rate is not merely a statistic. It is a monument to something unbreakable buried deep inside the human spirit. We are a species that stared directly into the face of extinction and answered back, no. We will not dissolve into the ash. The worst moment to have been born was undeniably 74,000 years ago. But it was equally the moment we became something more than just another animal. It was the furnace that shaped us, the darkness that carved our character, and the nightmare we clawed our way out of to eventually construct everything we call the world today.